Hi everyone! Welcome to our second episode of Mentos, where we take big topics in bite-sized pieces. I'm Josh.
I'm Daniel.
And we are mentors here at IUSM.
Yeah, so last week we talked about the question of whether or not belief in God is only for the uneducated. But if you didn't make it, feel free to check out that video in the link below. We played a clip from Francis Collins, the director of the National Institutes of Health, where he shares about how he came to see that reason and faith aren't in contradiction, but actually go hand in hand with each other. He lists a number of reasons that help him to believe in God, and one of them is the moral argument.
What is the moral argument, Daniel?
Great question, Josh. That's what we're going to be talking about today. And to explain the moral argument, we have a short and informative video to present it to you.
Can you be good without God? Let's find out. Absolutely astounding. There you have it. Undeniable proof that you can be good without believing in God. But wait, the question isn't, can you be good without believing in God? The question is, can you be good without God? See, here's the problem. If there is no God, what basis remains for objective good or bad, right or wrong? If God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. And here's why. Without some objective reference point, we have no way of saying that something is really up or down. God's nature provides an objective reference point for moral values. It's the standard against which all actions and decisions are measured. But if there's no God, there's no objective reference point. All we're left with is one person's viewpoint, which is no more valid than anyone else's viewpoint. This kind of morality is subjective, not objective. It's like a preference for strawberry ice cream. The preference is in the subject, not the object. So it doesn't apply to other people. In the same way, subjective morality applies only to the subject. It's not valid or binding for anyone else. So, in a world without God, there can be no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. God has expressed His moral nature to us as commands. These provide the basis for moral duties. For example, God's essential attribute of love is expressed in His command to love your neighbor as yourself. This command provides a foundation upon which we can affirm the objective goodness of generosity, self-sacrifice, and equality. And we can condemn as objectively evil greed, abuse, and discrimination. This raises a problem. Is something good just because God wills it, or does God will something because it is good? The answer is neither one. Rather, God wills something because He is good. God is the standard of moral values, just as a live musical performance is the standard for a high-fidelity recording.
Without your love.
The more a recording sounds like the original, the better it is. Likewise, the more closely a moral action conforms to God's nature, the better it is. But if atheism is true, there is no ultimate standard. So there can be no moral obligations or duties. Who or what lays such duties upon us? No one. Remember, for the atheist, humans are just accidents of nature, highly evolved animals. But animals have no moral obligations to one another. When a cat kills a mouse, it hasn't done anything morally wrong. The cat's just being a cat. If God doesn't exist, we should view human behavior in the same way. No action should be considered morally right or wrong. But the problem is, good and bad, right and wrong, do exist. Just as our sense experience convinces us that the physical world is objectively real, our moral experience convinces us that moral values are objectively real. Every time you say, "Hey, that's not fair, that's wrong, that's an injustice," you affirm your belief in the existence of objective morals. We're well aware that child abuse, racial discrimination, and terrorism are wrong for everybody, always. Is this just a personal preference or opinion? No. The man who says that it is morally acceptable to rape little children is just as mistaken as the man who says 2 + 2 = 5. What all this amounts to, then, is a moral argument for the existence of God. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. But objective moral values and duties do exist. Therefore, God exists. Atheism fails to provide a foundation for the moral reality every one of us experiences every day. In fact, the existence of objective morality points us directly to the existence of God.
Wow, that was a pretty packed video. Let's go over the flow of the arguments again so we can understand it a little better. Here's the argument. First, if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. Second, objective moral values and duties do exist. So third, therefore, God does exist.
And I can see how there need to be something external to humans with moral authority in order for objective moral values and duties to exist. Otherwise, everyone could just make up their own standards of right and wrong. But how do we know objective moral values and duties actually do exist?
Another great question, Josh. Well, going back to the video, the way that we know that there is objective moral right and wrong is that our moral experience tells us so. Much like our experience of being grounded to the floor or tripping and falling informs us that gravity exists.
I like how in the video you see the man and he says, "It's not fair," when the robber takes his wallet. And that really shows that we intuitively know that stealing is wrong. And that's a moral truth that we recognize as objective. It's a bit of an artificial example, but can we think of other real-life stories that can help us understand this idea of moral experience?
Yeah, one story that comes to mind for me is the story of Chikako Ishikawa. Chikako was a Japanese school teacher in Tokyo who was murdered by a school security guard over a dispute that they had. He strangled her and then he buried her in his living room floor, and then the crime was actually hidden for 26 years. He finally confessed to the crime when the city announced that it was going to demolish his house for a road expansion project because they would find the body. And astonishingly, according to Japanese law at the time, unresolved murder cases became obsolete after 15 years, so he could not be charged with the crime, and he'll probably never be held responsible for his actions. And my gut reaction, and probably most of ours, is that that's wrong. That's objectively wrong, regardless of what the law says. And I can't imagine the pain and loss that our parents had to go through all those years.
Wow, that's a chilling story. I can't believe he confessed to that murder and got away with it. Man, that's really upsetting.
Yeah, that sense of pain and anger at that wrongdoing is probably shared by many of us upon hearing that story. And it shows that we know what is morally right and wrong, which suggests that there are more objective moral standards and values.
Yeah, I think I get it. And another story that reminds me of is the story of Oskar Schindler. His story, I think, really demonstrates that we not only recognize what's objectively wrong, but also what's objectively right. See, Oskar Schindler, he was a member of the Nazi Party in Germany during World War II, and they ran a factory that made bullets. Initially, he hired Jews because their wages are really cheap, as said by the Nazis. But over time, he came to care for his Jewish workers and even protected them from being executed in the gas chambers. He eventually spent most of his money bribing Nazi officials to protect his workers, which left him extremely poor. And famously, he rescued 1,200 of his Jewish workers by writing out a whole list to be sent out to modern-day Czech Republic instead of being executed in Germany at the end of the war. And if you're interested, these events are actually portrayed in the movie Schindler's List. It's directed by Steven Spielberg. When I first watched this movie, I was really moved because what Oskar Schindler did was so right. I think we can all recognize that what he did was objectively and morally good, even though the Nazi government at the time deemed it right to execute the Jews instead of saving them. What he did was so good that we still honor him today, and there's a movie that was made to remember his story.
Wow, it's really fitting that we honor him that way. And I think Both Ishikawa and Schindler's stories really highlight our intuitive sense of objective right and wrong that's independent of our environments. In other words, objective moral values do exist. And if these first two premises are true, then the logical conclusion is also true, that God does exist.
Wow, that gives us a lot to think about. And that's all we have for tonight's episode of Mentos. Thank you all for tuning in, and we hope to see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Mentos?
Nah, I'm good.